everybody, welcome back to BRStv and another episode of This or That. Today we're going to be talking about aquascaping, and specifically aquascaping or optimizing your aquarium aquascape for either fish habitat or coral habitat. Joining me today, we've got Kyle here. Kyle, could you take a moment, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kyle. You've probably seen me around in the BRStv channel as the moderator during Black Friday lives. As a background, I've been doing reefing for about 16 years now. I started when I was in middle school. Got the bug pretty bad, and I've been doing it ever since. Got the bug so bad that I started working at Bulk Reef Supply about 5 years ago. So I'm here now.
Yeah, and we have roped him into helping us out today. So
yeah,
super excited about it, right?
Hooked me in right away.
Yeah, right. That's right. All right, so let's get right into it. You know, when we're doing aquascaping, there's so many different ways to do it. There's so many different options. There's so many different things to consider. And I find most of the time the hardest part is really visualizing or thinking about what your tank is going to look like in the future, what you want it to look like. I know when I first started the hobby, I would throw a bunch of rock in the tank and I'd be like, that looks awesome. And then as soon as everything started to grow, it was too big. I had to remove rock, all kinds of stuff. So let's just get into it. If we're talking about, I think one of the first things you really need to ask yourself if you're going to set up an aquarium is, do I want to optimize everything for fish? Do I want to have a lot of fish, or do I just want to focus on a lot of coral? So let's go into it. So if we're talking about, let's just say coral habitat first off, right? What are some of the top considerations in your mind for optimizing your aquarium for coral?
A couple of the first things that come to mind would be space for the coral to grow, especially when it comes to aquascaping near the glass. I really don't want to get too close to the glass with those joining corals. Yeah. Because it's a pain in the butt to scrape your glass and keep the algae off the glass if your corals are growing into it. Just means you're going to be trimming a lot of coral very frequently. Yeah,
I actually, one of my first reef tanks ever, I had that exact same problem. And it was like one of those standard 125s. So it wasn't really deep to begin with. But if you look down from one end of the tank, it was just like this wall of coral, that was about 1.5 inches from the glass where I'd get in there and scrape.
Yeah, especially those montiporas. You just have a straight line of montipora cap.
Yeah, and that's a really tough one. So if you're new to the hobby, that's something to think about. Or if it's something that you're just getting into coral, do you have that adequate space between your rock structure and the front glass or even the side glass? If you're really, really picky about how clean your aquarium looks, maybe you want to make sure the back glass is clean too. So just keeping a good bit of space between everything, especially I think if you're going to optimize for coral, one of those things to kind of think and keep in consideration, I guess, is just less is more, because you're going to have to save a lot of room for that growth. So
definitely. So another thing with that spacing and everything, if you get really big into the acropora, especially those staghorn corals, you get to the surface, they're going to be growing out of the water pretty quick too. Yeah, if they're happy.
Yeah, they're going to hit so quick. You're going to have to, in order to make them even be able to grow and look natural, you're going to have to almost glue them all the way down to the bottom, right? And other than that, they just take up so much space at that point in time. So
exactly.
Yeah, lots of things to consider. It takes a while, I think, to get it right. So you've got to kind of, a little trial and error there, so don't get too caught up with it. And you can always change your rock structure. But if you're going to build a tank to optimize for coral, space for growth is probably one of the major considerations. Another one for me is just that I like to focus on, because I'm a big coral guy. I'm more of a coral guy. So if I'm going to set up an aquarium, for instance, I'm going to think about how much coral I can get into it and how it's going to look when it grows. But I also do like a few fish, but I'm kind of an incognito fish kind of guy. So I am going to look at maximizing the amount of space I have to actually mount corals, right? So
definitely.
You have experience with that. You do anything with that?
I am very cognizant about how big the coral is going to get, how heavy it's going to get. So I like to give plenty of space for the coral to actually fully grow, because I love the mature colony look versus having 1,000 different frags.
Yes.
So I try to optimize space for a couple of key corals, and that I have that filler space with two of those faster growing encrusters or zoanthids.
And that was a great point, actually. As they get bigger, they're going to start weighing a lot more, especially some of these big SPS colonies, these little calcareous corals. They're going to start to gain some weight. If you've got an unstable rock structure or something that's still maybe a little loose, or it's really not adhered really well, maybe you didn't use the right mortar, you didn't use mortar at all, maybe you're using zip ties, I don't know what you're using, but if it's not structurally sound, there's a good chance that thing's just going to fall off of there. And the last thing you want to do is come home and see your big SPS colony like smashed against the front of your tank or something where that rock collapsed.
Free fragging, right?
Cheap and easy fragging. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that's, that's good to have somebody that looks on the bright side. I like that. So look, Kyle, he's going to make sure that we're always looking on the positive side of all the mistakes here. So I like that.
That's what I'm here for.
Perfect. So yeah, so always make sure if you're gonna optimize for coral, make sure you've got lots of space for coral to frag or to mount your corals. Flat surfaces, angled surfaces. Just think about the future. Are you going to do mostly LPS? You're going to do mostly SPS? You're going to do softies? Just think about these things and make sure you've got that in mind, or at least an idea of where you're wanting to go, because it's almost impossible to visualize what it's all going to look like in the end. What else? What else should you consider?
Especially for those SPS and acropora nuts, you got to consider flow and circulation overall. If your aquascape's blocking the flow, the SPS are not going to get the flow that they need to be healthy, grow fast, be colorful.
Yeah, and this
quickly.
Yeah, that's something that kind of changed with sort of the influx of the man-made rock into the hobby. Before, you would buy a bunch of live rock from someplace, and very few times did you actually get to pick out all your live rock. You would buy it in bulk, and then you would just stack it up and try to make it look cool. But you really had to work hard to kind of make sure you were maximizing and optimizing that flow behind. I used to always put a power head behind my rock wall in my aquariums, right, just to make sure that water is flowing. But now, I mean, you can really create some really cool open space and make sure that water is flowing through everything.
Exactly. I just remember when I first got started, the name of the game was rock wall. So
that's it. That's it.
Top to bottom, it was just a wall of rock, and you place corals wherever you could get it to attach, and then hope it didn't fall over.
Yeah, right. And that's kind of gone out of fashion. And admittedly, I mean, I've still seen there's still some beautiful tanks out there that have that rock structure. So there's nothing wrong with it. But yeah, it is definitely out of style, and there are some challenges with it, especially around that flow. There's always plenty of room to mount corals, but you're building up detritus, all kinds of stuff. So another thing to think about, just keeping that, nice and open rock structure for flow to get through there. That's going to help keep your nutrients down too, kicking up detritus, everything else. So just, that's one thing that I always take in consideration. How much flow am I going to be able to get through this rock structure so there's not a lot of stuff settling down? That even doubles up for me because I'm also a sand bed guy.
Oh yeah.
I don't like bare bottoms. I've seen bare bottoms before that I really dig, but for the most part, I'm a sand bed guy. So I don't want all of that nutrient. I know I'm going to already have probably a little bit more nutrient in the tank because of the sand bed, which I'm okay with. I just don't want a bunch more building up in the live rock as well. So always a good idea to have plenty of flow in those.
Exactly.
All right. What else we got? How about lighting access? That's a big one.
That's definitely important. You have a variety of corals that come from all sorts of different environments. Some of those corals come from super shallow waters where they're blasted with sunlight all day long.
Yeah.
Love it. Then you got corals that are found deeper down that don't get as much sunlight, or they grow underneath other corals. So they're just naturally shaded. They rely a little bit more on just catching food as opposed to full on sunlight for their growth. Then you also got people that like MPS corals that just don't need light at all and typically close up if you give them any light.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, and that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, with mixed reefs, especially if you're going to have a really nice mixed reef that maybe isn't primarily SPS dominated, but you're going to end up with all these different levels of light that you're going to have for, if you're going to have zoas in there, you're going to have some other softies, probably acans that, some of these things you can almost put in the shade in the aquarium, literally. They can make it off just what's reflecting off the glass, but always make sure that you've got that depth of field when it comes to lighting access. So you've got, caves and crevices, sort of like shelves and plates sticking out. You've got ledges for things to go under. So lots of different places where you can get those corals that maybe don't want as much light or need more light.
Yeah, I've found a lot of corals that really surprise me with how little light they like would be those Micromusa lords or Aussie lord corals, Aquascaping. Found you give them like a little bit too much light, they just don't grow as fast. Yeah, and they're a little bit less puffy because they're trying to not get too much light.
Yes, you're right. So you're absolutely right. It's like it's just like a plant or anything else, right? You give it too much light, the leaves are going to bleach out. If you don't give them as much light, they're going to get these nice green leaves. So it's kind of the same thing, right? They're going to be in the shade a little bit. They're going to usually color up a lot better too. Yeah. So, acans, that's one, like micromusas, those things like that you talk about. I'll put them in the shade, like literally underneath a rock.
Yeah.
And they just love it. They're just fine, right? They're not getting complete darkness like an NPS or something, but
exactly.
They're still loving life. So, other things that I like to consider, is just, kind of trying to get creative. And I think, again, that makes it really, it makes it handy now with the man-made rock and some of the mortars and things like that we can use now in our aquariums to build these really intricate, super cool rock structures. Just getting creative, utilizing some of the space that you wouldn't usually use. There are some really cool things like to frag mounts, things like that you can actually put on the side of the aquariums or the back wall, just to add that additional depth of field or that extra dimension. I don't know. You ever use any of those, like those?
Yeah, I've used them a couple times, especially when I get loads of frags. I like just mounting them on the back glass until I figure out where I really want to put that coral in the aquascape, because sometimes it takes me a couple of weeks just to really settle on a spot where that coral would look really good.
Yeah, I've actually had one tank where I played around and I just glued coral frags to the back wall, just completely, and just I did draw onto that. It was super cool.
I actually did that with some blastos because I saw a video where someone was mounting them vertically as opposed to like on the rock, because they grew a little bit better.
Yeah, it looked great. I mean, a lot of people do it with like GSPs, which always looks cool. You've got that grassy back wall, but yeah, I mean, you can use more than just your aquascape. Another thing to consider if you're building a tank for just coral, that's your focus. You're trying to build this aquascape for coral only. Keep in mind, the coral is going to cover almost every surface eventually, right? That's the plan, right? If you're a coral person, your goal is to probably stuff as much as you possibly can in there.
Yeah, if you're successful.
If you're successful, right? If everything goes well, all things considered, which I'm sure it will, you're doing a great job out there. But you're not going to see the rock. So if there's something that looks funny about it, or you're just like, I don't know if I like this little transition here, don't get too caught up on it. You'll drive yourself nuts trying to make this really cool rock structure that eventually you're not going to see anyway. I mean, I've seen some amazing tanks where people actually just have rock structures made out of PVC pipe. And SPS corals growing all over them. You can't see the pipe, or you don't even notice it because you're looking at all these beautiful colonies. And then you get in close and you're like, oh, they're all mounted on PVC pipe, but you don't even care because they just look awesome.
So yeah, I like to think of the rockwork as architecture, or just the skeleton of what your tank's gonna look like. It's just a foundation to get things started. Just like when you're seeing someone build a skyscraper, you see those beams, 10 years later, it does not look like those beams at all.
Right, you're never gonna see those beams again.
Exactly.
Right. You're glad they're there, but you're never gonna see it. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so anything else that you would take into, that's probably most of mine, I think, but anything else you would take into consideration?
Related to lighting access, I would also like to consider access to being able to feed the corals. So if you're getting corals that you love to feed, if you want to give them those pellets like once a week, like you would with a micromusa or blasto possibly, make sure that you're putting them in a spot where you're going to be able to actually feed them. The more difficult it is to feed them, the less likely you are to do it.
That's a great call. Tank height and depth too plays into that too. Make sure you could reach things and get around to where you want. If you need to do some work, you need to do some fragging, all that stuff's important. If you've got too much going on with your rock work, it may just be hard to access something. Or if something falls, you may never see it again, right? Yeah. In the old rock wall days, I had that happen to me. I would lose a frag or something. And I'm like, well, either I tear down my entire rock structure to get it, or I just I let it roll.
I ended up with a lot of monopore digitata colonies by accident.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, same. Or I had old body caps that you would break it by accident and a piece would get blown off, and then you'd see it coming up the back wall someday or something. So, all right, cool. So let's move straight on into fish habitat.
Yeah.
All right. So those are some of at least our considerations. If you've got other considerations, throw in the comments. Love to hear it. So if maybe we forgot about or need to take into consideration, but those are some of ours. Let's talk about fish. What's your first consideration? If you're going to build a fish, like it could be a reef, but if you know you're going to just load this thing up, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking about the fish I'm going to get first. So different fish or different focuses are going to require a little bit different thought process when it comes to setting up their aquascape. You're getting a bunch of anthias. You don't need a ton of rock structure.
You don't want it.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to look at the reef. They're a couple meters above everything, swimming around in a big school.
Exactly. They're not hiding in the rocks. But if you're getting a bunch of basslets, if you want to do like a harem of royal grommas, you want a lot of rocks, a lot of holes, because they like to stick really close to the rockwork, swim in and out of it. So
same with the dwarf angels and gobies and things like that. Like they're not typically out there in the open hanging out. They like to be in the background. So that's a great point. So like swimming space and habitat for those different fish. One, know what kind of fish you want. Like if you want a lot of open, free swimming fish, maybe you don't need much of a rock structure, right? Like you said, like the schooling fish, anthias, things like that. I find that even tangs really like some sort of rock structure. If you notice, anybody that has them, they do like to swim around out in the open, but if they have to get from one place to another, they will almost always go between rocks and like down through an archway or a crevice. They really like those sort of little tight spaces and tunnels for some reason. They'll have to go through those. So having those dynamics, those spaces to swim, and places to hide. Also
depends on the type of tang too, because you got those Nazo tangs that they are like open water swimmers. Then over those power blue tangs or yellow tangs, they're much closer to the rock brevigs.
Yeah, if you have lingies, unicorns, all those guys, nasos, they're going to be out and about. They're never going to do that. But yeah,
They might actually top
yellow tang, the yellow tang, purple tang, things like that. They're going to be diving around in that rock. So, think about that. What kind of fish you're going to have? Know what kind of, space or swimming environment that they're going to want. That's a great consideration to take into place. So,
Yeah.
And along with that, I think goes like we talked about. Swimming space is one, but also hiding spots. Right? There's some fish that just aren't going to do well without a hiding spot.
Yeah. You got fish that sleep in the rocks, so they naturally hide in the rocks in order to sleep at night. So depending on the wrasse that you get, fairy wrasses, flasher wrasses, some of those 6-line wrasses and similar species, they're going to sleep in the rockwork itself, create a little cocoon, which I think is really cool. But then you have other fish that don't use the rock at all to sleep. So you got those leopard wrasses, the Hylocoris species wrasses like your mononars and the Hylocoris that
they're not going to need it in the sand.
Yeah, exactly.
Like they're going to sleep down in the sand. They don't need rock work, but that's which we'll get to it in a minute, but they might actually require sand, a sand bed and things, something like that.
A little bit different, but something to consider about where they sleep. And also just some fish don't like light as much. So you get some of those deeper water species of reef angels that they're all really, really shy. And it might be because you have too much light on the tank. Yeah. So you get one of my favorite dwarf angel fish species is the Venesis angel.
Okay.
They're a deeper water species. They are very much rock dwellers.
Yeah.
They don't like a lot of light. You give them too much light, they're never coming out of the rock.
I used to have a midnight dwarf angel.
Oh, those are so cool.
So cool. And they hung out in the shadows all the time. I knew he was in there, but most people never even saw him because he was always in the cracks or in the dark, and he's jet black anyway. So it's like, I'm like, yeah, no, there's a cool angelfish in there, but you can't see him. I swear he's swimming around in there, but I don't know where. So yeah, awesome fish. So yeah, that's a really good one. But yeah, great point. Some fish like to sleep in rocks. I used to like to watch hippo tangs when at night they squeeze down a crevice and then expand their dorsal fin and just pin themselves in there, which is really fun when you work at a fish store and you're trying to catch one for a customer and it swims into some live rock and you're sitting there trying to shake it out. Yeah. So yeah, which don't do that. It's a bad idea, but
it's a little stressful.
It's a little stressful for them. They don't like that. So yeah, I remember before I have to tell a customer, I'm like, well, I'll try to remove that rock later, come back in an hour. We'll try to catch them again because I'm just not going to mess into it. So, okay. Territorial. So when we're talking about hiding spots, it's not just for sleeping or just general, not necessarily, like I said, sleeping or just general use or just like the way they like to swim around. But in some cases you have to have, sort of territorial boundaries built.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's pretty simple. Like if you have, let's just say you have multiple outcrops of in your aquarium of rock, right? Sometimes just building an archway between them that creates sort of a false boundary, even if it's not really, that's enough sometimes just to create a territorial break. If you've got a couple tangs, like, okay, they'll eventually decide, okay, this is my side, that's your side, we're fine. Not always. I find I always like to have some sort of a crevice or a cove in my rock structures for a nice, hopefully, like I would say if I get a nice pair of clownfish or something like that, some place for them to kind of, hey, this is our spot. I don't want to be bothered by anybody else, that kind of thing. So yeah, any considerations around those that you?
Yeah, I
kind of mine.
I like to use a blend of. I'm not really a fish only type person. So I always like to use the rockwork to kind of lay that groundwork for the early editions of the tank, and then I always factor in my corals with placement to kind of create more boundaries because as those SPS grow, they're going to grow up, they're going to grow out. Let's add more boundary lines for the fish to kind of lay an invisible line of like where they cannot cross or where they won't cross in another fish's territory.
And give them also, that's another great point. Like as your corals grow, especially some of those SPS, some of the bigger LPS, like the branching ones, or even big leather corals and things, they're going to provide additional hiding spaces for the fish as well. You'll see, gobies and I get this like the Andeus, they love to swim around inside the branches of the coral and stuff, especially big staghorns.
I love the little clown gobies that they live. Yeah. Just like a little game every time trying to find which coral they're fighting in.
All the time, right? Yeah, so that's a pretty good one. And then we touched on it a while ago, another part to consider, I think, with your aquascaping, because, if we're talking about corals, what substrate you use doesn't necessarily matter as much unless you were a big bare bottom person, you want corals growing on the bottom of your tank. But if you're talking about fish, there's some substrate considerations there, right?
Yeah.
You might have, if you want certain fish, you might have to have a sand bed. I know people that have, for instance, they're like, oh, I'd love to have one of these jawfish. Like, again, when I used to work at a fish store years ago, they're like, oh, that blue spot jawfish or that pearly head those are so cool. They're like, I want one of those. I'm like, okay, well, you're going to need at least, 3 to 6 inches of sand in your tank, because that's what they want to be happy. I mean, you could get by with 2 to 3 probably, but really the more the better for those guys. So, keep that in mind. Are you going to want some of these beautiful leopard wrasses or, chorus wrasses, anything like that? Because they're going to want to burrow down and sleep in the sand and get down in there. Are you going to want sand sifting starfish? Are you going to, want Nacerius snails? Whatever, right? So there are things that are going to need a substrate.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. I don't believe in giving them a bare bottom tank and then making them suffer. I think it just adds stress to the fish. Yeah, there's a whole lot more difficult to keep them, especially with those leopard wrasses where they're already difficult to get acclimated to captivity. Yeah. Just adding another layer of that complexity is not really worth it in my mind. But if you are dead set on doing a bare bottom tank because you want to do crazy amount of flow for Agropora only tank, I've seen a lot of people using just like Tupperware containers with sand in them.
A sandbox.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard of this. Yeah. I've never seen one in person, but I've heard of people doing this, which to me, it just kind of cracks me up. I think it's hilarious that we provide a sandbox for our fish.
I think it's funny.
It's hilarious, but I'm just more of a, just put a sand bed in there kind of guy. But no, it's a fair point. And I'm a huge fan of shrimp goby combos. I don't think it gets much better than having a really cool, especially if you've got a mated pair of like, banded high fins, Ziashias or whatever, right? And then a really cool pistol shrimp with them. It's just cool. It's another dynamic to your tank that is there and other people may not notice, but they're going to want a sand bed as well, right? And can they survive without one? Yes, but they will not be, in my opinion, they won't do as well as happy. They're just not going to do as well, right? I mean, because they want that spot to hide in. They want that shrimp to live with. So just things to consider, right? And there are lots of fish like that. Like I said, some of the gobies.
Yeah, jawfish for sure.
Jawfish is a big one. Yeah, so some of the Watchman gobies like that, with the pistol shrimp symbiotes, the any of the diamond sleeper gobies, any of the sand sifting ones. Goatfish, if you want those someday, which
those aren't super common, but
not super common, but they're super cool actually. If you watch them swim around and just digging in the sand, it's super, super neat. So, but just keep that in mind. If you know there's a fish out there that you want, that's what you're gonna get.
Plan around it for sure.
Yep. All right. So other considerations for a fish only tank?
Definitely something to consider with those, especially those bigger fish species. So if you're doing like a fish only tank, for sure with flamingo tangs, other naso tangs, triggerfish, make sure that your rock is still secure. Just like if you're having corals on there, they're gonna get heavy. Those fish are very clumsy and they bump into things. So if it's not corals, it might be your whole rock structure tumbling down.
Yeah. Very true. Yeah. So make sure everything's really stable. You don't want anything to get knocked over and crushed. Like if it's corals, that's going to be heartbreaking. Your fish, probably good chance they'll get out of the way, but you never know. So just keep that in mind. One thing I've dealt with before, not necessarily personally, but just if somebody does have a fish only tank and they've got some really nice, maybe high dollar fish in there, and something is wrong and they need to maybe treat that particular fish, but they don't want to do it with the rest of the inhabitants of the tank, they need to remove that fish. If you've got a really complex, huge rock structure, that's going to be a pain. So, or if it's all epoxy together, it might be a pain. So maybe the ability to remove parts of it if you need to, or, maybe some of the top pieces just to get in there a little bit easier, maybe something to consider. But at the end of the day, if you're not sure where you want to go, or you don't have that particular end goal in mind, best thing to do, plan for both. Right?
Yeah.
Don't go overboard. Less is more in your rock structure. Make sure there's plenty of space for fish to swim around. Make sure there's plenty of mounting surface for coral. You're far enough away from the top, sides, front, back, and it's nice and secure. And really, as long as you're doing those things, you're probably going to be all right.
Yeah. I say also along the lines of getting fish out, make the rock structure one where it's easy to put back together. If you're in love with your aquascape, you take it apart and it's not all epoxy together, it's not going to go back together the exact same way again. So aquascaping and keeping some of those pieces together, so it's one structure, two structure, three structure, will make it a lot easier to put back together once you're done rearranging things.
Yeah, I've done that. There's nothing more annoying than trying to put it back together and it never looks as good. So yeah, fair comment. So, all right, any last thoughts? I think that's about all I've got.
I think that nails it on the head.
All right, well, hey guys, thanks for joining us for another episode of This or That. We'll see you guys next time.